Hello everybody and welcome to Flock Talk. Today I'm going to be showing you how you can teach your birds to go to bed on cue. Going to bed on cue is such an underrated skill. It not only saves you a lot of time from having to chase your bird around the house to get them to bed when you need to leave, but it also creates a really good calming protocol for you to be able to relieve a lot of separation anxiety that your bird might experience when you need to leave the home. Now, if done properly, this is a behavior that can save you a lot of time and a lot of stress. So the first thing we're going to do is simply reward our bird for going in the doorway of the cage. Even though our end goal is to have the bird be able to hop all the way into the cage and onto our perch while we shut the door, we do need to make sure that they are comfortable going into their cage first. Now, if you have a bird who is in their cage for a big portion of the day, there is a very big chance that this may be a bigger hurdle for you than you anticipate. If they tend to be pretty stressed out or uncomfortable or feeling a lot of anxiety by being inside their cage, you may find that when you ask your bird just to step on the doorway, that they end up not wanting to do that. And if it's too big of a step for them to start here, what I would do instead is maybe have a back of a chair a little bit further away, but kind of close to the cage. And that way what you can have them do is you can have them perch on the chair instead and gradually work your way towards the cage until the bird is comfortable stepping up onto something really close to the door frame and then stepping up onto the door frame itself. Alternatively, you could also put a perch on the outside of the cage and ask the bird to step up onto that perch and then gradually shuffle over into the door frame. And those are two alternative ways that you could take if your bird is a little bit anxious stepping straight onto the door frame itself. So every time Toto steps off of my hand and onto the door frame, I'm just going to give him a quick treat and then ask him to step off. Nice and easy, simple, not a lot of complex steps to it. What I'm looking for here is a bird that is able to step off onto the door frame without hesitation, doesn't need a lot of excessive luring, and is feeling pretty comfortable there, so they're not looking to quickly jump off of it, they're not looking frantic or for an escape route. They're just happy sitting in the door frame without any signs of stress. If your bird needs it, you may need to lure them straight onto the door frame so they'll really be following your hand. You can use a target stick for this as well. I just haven't target trained Toto yet, and that's my own fault. So what you do want to try and do is phase out your lure a little bit, so that way you're able to just be able to point at the cage and have them hop on the door frame. And the easiest way to do that is usually to slowly conceal the treat that you're holding between your fingers, so that way it's no longer visible, and then gradually slide your thumb down your index finger each repetition. So you go from 2 pinched fingers holding the treat to the tip of your index finger pointing out, and then your hand will slowly ball into the fist with just the index pointing out. So that way you go from straight up luring them to having that pointer finger being the gesture for guiding them towards the cage. And then from there you can shift from needing your hand kind of inside the cage to lure them on to having it lifted a little bit higher, a little bit further away, and just having the hand be a little bit less of a direct guide with each repetition until you're able to just point and have the bird hop on. Additionally, you could also just make the bird on your hand being moved towards the cage as the cue to hop off onto the door frame. And for that, all you would do is make sure that you are presenting the bird to the cage before your luring hand shows up, because then what's going to happen is if you present the bird first and then your hand, they're going to start anticipating your lure hand showing up, and they will start to hop off onto that cage before your other hand has shown up. And then that pointer hand isn't even needed, because just you moving them towards the cage will begin to trigger them to hop off onto that door frame. So the next step is going to be moving our way into the cage. And for this, I really do recommend using a target stick. It does make it a lot easier. What I find happens a lot of the time with luring is if you are trying to stick a treat through the bars, the bird will come outside of the cage and stand on your hand to get the treat instead, and that can make it a lot more difficult to communicate. If you're not able to fit your arm inside the cage like I'm able to here, it can make it a lot more difficult. So I would recommend using a target stick for this, but if you don't have one, try and use a really long treat and try and guide them inside instead of going through the outside of the bars. It'll make it a lot easier for your bird to understand that you want them inside the cage. This can be another big boundary spot for a lot of birds, where going inside usually means the door is about to get slammed shut really quickly. It usually means they might be bored for a while, and it can be pretty stressful. So your bird might be put off of entering the cage right away, and what I would do instead is maybe practice climbing on the outside of the cage first, get them used to the idea of just clambering around the cage by following your lure or your target stick, so that way they're getting a bit more comfortable with that concept. And then you can gradually work on going inside of the cage, or again, you could have a perch right close to that doorway there, right underneath that frame they've been sitting on, and you might have easier luck with that over needing them to crawl onto the bars in order to access a perch. Toto here did not present much issue with entering the cage, aside from him trying to figure out how to climb, since this is a new skill for him. So I'm just going to gently guide him into the cage, and I'm gradually trying to work my way towards the perch that's over there, going at whatever pace he's comfortable with. So I'm going to just lure him, guide him in, let him have the treat as soon as he's reached my fingers, and let him explore. You can either reset each rep so you're bringing them back to the door frame, or you can just lure them all the way around the cage and have a bit of fun with it. But I would make sure to practice a few different reps where you get the bird to hop onto the door frame and then start to crawl up, just so that way you start beginning that chain of events. Once you're reliably getting them moving around the cage without any fear or hesitancy, we can start to encourage them to step off onto the perch. Again, this is way easier with a target stick, since you can just poke it through the bars and the bird can very clearly, easily see where you want them to go. But again, I'm using a lure in this situation, so I'm going to have to awkwardly stretch my hand inside the cage to guide him onto the perch, since going from the outside of the bars will just probably cause him to stay on the wall. So I do want to make sure that my hand is inside the cage with him to make this a lot easier. For some birds, you may need to break this down, so that way you reward them just for touching their beak to the perch, then one foot to the perch, and then both feet. In my case here, Toto happily jumped off onto the perch right away, so I kind of got to skip all of those steps. But if you need to break it down further, those options are there. This is going to be the bulk of the rest of this process. So what I'm just aiming to do here is lure Toto from the door frame to the perch. And I'm going to repeat this over and over and over again, knowing that he is only going to get the treat when his feet have touched that perch. And I want it to be very, very clear that when your feet touch the perch is what is making the treat show up. I don't want him thinking that having his feet hanging off the walls or being half on the wall is going to be the end goal. I want him to know that that perch is our target location. The faster you get your feet to that spot, the faster the reward is going to come. And every time he's successful, I'm going to give him a treat for standing on the perch, and then I'll quickly ask him to step up and leave the situation. And then we're going to reset the rep. I do want to make sure we are practicing the entire sequence of this behavior. So I don't want to just have him already on the door frame and be luring him into the perch. That's a great way to start this process so your bird isn't getting tired trying to do multiple behaviors at once. But once they are reliably landing on that perch and they're not lollygagging around and looking confused, that's when we're going to start adding in the rest of the sequence of him going and landing on the door frame to begin with. So I'll have him on my hand, I'll ask him to jump up onto the door frame, I'll give him a treat for landing on the door frame, and then I'll ask him to go to the perch, and he will get another treat for going to the perch. I'll repeat that process over and over and over again until he's looking like he's picking up really quickly, and then I'm going to phase out the treat that I give in the door frame. So now he's only getting one reward, and that's when his feet land on the designated perch. If you do this and you phase out that treat and your bird loses interest, it just means that you phased it out a little too quickly, and what I would probably do instead is use a low value treat for landing on the door frame and use a really high value treat or multiple treats for putting their feet on the perch inside. This way the bird's going to be more motivated to make it to that stick, and being on the door frame for long periods of time will not be as valuable. So over and over and over again, we're going to hop onto the door frame and onto the perch, and then you can either lure your bird back out or you can ask them to step up. I opted to ask Toto to step up out of the cage simply because Toto lacks stamina. So every time I'm asking him to climb back out, it's a repetition that I could have had going the other direction. He gets tired really, really quickly, and I don't want to exhaust his feet. I'd rather get more successful repetitions. So I'm just asking him to step up from inside the cage. You by no means have to do it that way. It's just what worked best for us to get the most bang for our buck out of each repetition for training. So what I'm looking for next is one fluid motion that can be rewarded with one treat. So we've got Toto going onto the door frame and then needing a lot of guidance in order to make his way to the perch. And I want him to be able to know that me asking him to go to bed and pointing at the cage is one big fluid chain of events. So I want him to know that when I point at the cage, I want you to jump on that door frame and jump to the perch. It's two separate behaviors that need to be chained back to back. And this is going to start falling into place simply by phasing out our lure hand a little bit, so he becomes less reliant on following the hand and starts paying a bit more attention to the fact that his feet hitting the perch is the main goal and not so much following my fingers. So each time that I ask Toto to go to bed, I'm going to leave my hand a little bit further away from the end goal perch. So with the initial repetitions, I was having my fingers basically in front of his beak and guiding him all the way down. The next time I'm going to have them a couple inches from his face, so it's further away and he's not following it as directly. The next time I might have my hand already waiting at the perch, and the second he lands on it, the hand disappears. The next time I might have my hand kind of lingering between the doorway and the perch, so it's not all the way to the perch, but it's kind of in that general direction. And then the next time I'm going to leave my hand at the doorway, and I'm going to gradually phase my hand to the outside of the cage until I'm able to point and have him complete the entire action. Before I go ahead and shut the door with Toto inside, I want to make sure that he is comfortable staying inside the cage for the amount of time it'll take me to close the door in the first place, and that he understands to stay on that perch even with my hand moving and reaching towards the door. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cue him to go and hop onto his bedtime perch, and then I'm going to give him a treat, and then I'm going to wait maybe 1 or 2 seconds and I'll give him another one. 1 or 2 seconds, give him another one, and then I'll ask him to hop out. And what this is doing is building duration. So I'm giving him a few treats in various intervals of time, so that way he is learning to wait a little bit longer on that perch, knowing that another treat will eventually come. And this is going to teach him that waiting and waiting for time to pass, maintaining his feet on that perch, yields more rewards, as opposed to him trying to figure out how to get another treat and then hopping out onto the door frame or climbing up the walls or following my hand that'll be reaching for the door. We're just going to work on him learning how to stay on that perch for just a little bit longer. Over time, I can change the time intervals between treats, so when I'm first introducing this, the treats will be pretty back to back. He's finished chewing one, I'm ready right there with the next one, so he doesn't really have a chance to make a different choice. His feet are on the perch, he ate the treat on the perch, he gets another treat while still on the perch. Then the next time I'll wait for him to finish chewing, I'll give him half a second to think about the fact that his feet are still on the perch, and then I'll give him another one. And I'll wait a little bit more time each time until I've got a good decent amount of duration where I can hand him the treat for going on that perch. I can move my hands around and pretend like I'm going to shut the door, and he will still remain still. And that's when I know that he is ready and going to be capable of staying still with the additions of the door actually moving. Now, even though Toto is jumping in the cage super eagerly here and knows exactly what to do, I am not going to shut the door. What I'm going to do first is have Toto outside of the cage, and I'm just going to wiggle the door. Because the door is often used to enclose the bird inside the cage, if you work 8 hours a day and your bird goes in the cage for a long time and they feel stressed and anxious in there, they're going to see the door shutting as a really negative experience. So there's a very high chance that when you go to shut that door, your bird is going to panic. And if they're inside the cage when you move it for the first time, you're going to trash their trust, and they're going to think that you putting them in here is just a way to trick them in order to shut that door. And that's going to cause your training to completely collapse, and you're probably going to end up back at square one. So instead, I'm going to make sure to desensitize him to the door moving first. So I'm going to have him outside of the cage, either on a perch or on me, and I'm just going to wiggle it a very little bit. I'm not aiming to really shut the door, I'm not aiming to make a lot of noise, I'm just aiming to allow him to watch the door move and not feel like he's going to be trapped or scared by the door in any way. Each time I move the door, I'm going to give him a treat for watching it to pair it with a more positive experience, and then the next repetition I'll move the door a little bit more, and repeating that process until I'm able to fully shut the door in front of him and have him be pretty calm or even excited to watch the door be shut. What I do not want to see is a bird who's flying away, a bird who is really thinned out and scared, a bird who is vocalizing in fear, any sort of signs that my bird is uncomfortable with the movement of the door. I want to ensure they are fully comfortable and confident and potentially even excited to see the door moving before I move on. I'm also going to take the time to desensitize them to the sounds the door makes. So once the movement is settled, I'm going to allow the door to close, and I'm not going to slam it, but I am going to allow it to hit the other side of the metal, and it's going to make that little clanging sound, and I'll add a little bit of pressure until it's hitting that more realistic sound that it would make when I'm closing the door for real, and the force I would use to shut the door for real. I'll also move the lock and the little latch mechanism so he can hear the way that the metal sounds with that, and just get him comfortable with all of those sounds outside of the context of him being in the cage. Now that he is fully comfortable and been desensitized to all of that, now I will start introducing all of those same things with the door movement with Toto inside the cage. So I'm going to ask him to hop in, I'll give him a treat for standing on the perch, And then I will move the door a very small bit. And very small is the critical thing here. Again, especially if you do use your cage to contain your bird for long periods of time and you find that they're quite distressed and maybe really don't want to go in there. The smaller you can move the door, the better, because the second that you touch that door is going to be the biggest trigger for your bird in thinking that they're about to be trapped in there for hours, be left alone, and be scared and be nervous. And you don't want to trigger that. So you want your bird to be able to sit in there and see the door wiggle and immediately give them a huge jackpot treat, allow them to hop out, and keep processing. And you're going to move the door a little bit more each time with your bird being comfortable with it. If your bird is getting thinned out when you move that door, or they're bolting for the doorway when you do that, you need to find a way to move it even less. Maybe instead of moving it, you just move your hand towards it. Maybe you lightly just touch it with your hand, and you break it down into even smaller steps that your bird is able to manage. You are not trying to figure out how quickly you can shut this door with your bird in the cage so you can lock them in there. You are trying to find a way to clearly communicate that the door closing is okay and it's not something to be scared of. So with each repetition, we're shutting the door a little bit more, and then I'm going to fiddle with the lock. What I would recommend doing is, again, fiddling with the lock with the bird inside the cage, but without the door being shut first, because that's another thing that could trigger them into feeling like they're going to be trapped. So I would just fiddle with the lock a little bit with the door wide open first before adding it in to happening with the door being locked. Again, every single time I move the lock or I move the door, I'm going to give them a little treat and open the door right back up. If your bird does suddenly panic and does suddenly feel like they're trapped, open the door back up. Do not hold the door shut and wait for them to calm down before opening it. Just open the door and let them out. You want them to understand that they're not going to be trapped in here, that they are safe, and that they still have agency over the situation. If you shut the door and you pin the door shut until the bird calms down, you are flooding them, and that's just teaching them that every time they go in here, the door will be shut whether they like it or not, and that will be extremely aversive for them to experience. And that's pretty much it for teaching the foundations of this behavior, getting your bird to hop onto a designated perch and wait there patiently while you shut the door. Now, with this, one thing I do really want to emphasize is do not teach them this and then immediately use this behavior to put them in their cage when you go to leave. And the critical thing for that is that if you cue them in, and then every time you cue them in, they are left alone for hours on end and they get stressed or they get uncomfortable, they're going to end up with what's called a poisoned cue, where now every time you use this cue, it has led to something unpleasurable, and now they will not want to participate in that behavior because it has a lot of bad experiences tied with it. They followed that cue too many times, it led to them having a bad experience. So what you want to do is when your bird is learning this, I would still use whatever strategies you were using before to put them away when you're going to have to leave them for an unpleasurable amount of time. And instead, when you are practicing this, I would only use this cue to gradually add duration and get them more comfortable with you being gone. So I would practice this outside of the context of you needing to leave the home or needing to leave the room. And what that could look like is you have your training sessions, you've got your bird learned how to hop into the cage and shut the door. I would shut the door and I would stand in front of them for 10 seconds, and then I'd give them a treat and I'd open the door back up. And then you'd work your way up to being able to walk around a corner and disappear for a couple seconds and then come back. And then you work on going towards the front door. You'd practice doing your leaving the house routine where you pick up your backpack or you pick up your work computer. And your bird can start to see all of those elements that usually mean you're going to leave for a really long time. That would typically trigger a lot of anxiety and fear. And instead, they're going to see all of those experiences and then connect them with you not going anywhere and connect nothing bad happening. Instead, you picked up your work computer, you put it in your bag, and you went back to them. And that's going to slowly desensitize them to watching your leaving routine and it not triggering anything scary anymore. And so this behavior of asking them to go into their bed will not be poisoned by you leaving. And instead, you will have gradually desensitized the entire leaving protocol where now they see you getting ready to go, they have been put in their cage, and they are comfortable and calm and relaxed. They're not panicked knowing that you're about to leave, they're not scared, they're not distressed. And so each time you're practicing this, you're working on building just a little bit more duration so that way you ultimately can use this for when you do need to leave and go. And you've created this mindset where your bird goes into this cage with this cue and it by default means to be calm and relaxed and content, and everything will be okay. And then with that headspace, it makes it a lot easier for you to set your bird up for success, where now you can make sure to hide a few extra special treats in that cage or do an extra toy rotation when you do need to go. So when they go in there and they're in that state of being calm and comfortable, knowing that nothing bad is about to happen, they are more able to go and participate in those foraging activities and those fun things you have given them in order to occupy themselves. What can usually happen when you're dealing with a bird who is experiencing a lot of anxiety with you leaving is they are too distressed to enjoy the enrichment activities that you give them that are supposed to be helping them relieve that anxiety, because they're so focused on the fear, they're so focused on the panic, that it doesn't really allow them to be able to go and forage and truly relax. But with this system of creating that calmness first and building up all of those little elements that can lead to you leaving the door in those longer durations, your bird is now calm enough that when you set them up with those activities, they can participate in them. They have a much higher chance of being able to participate with them. And now when you do need to leave for those really long periods of time, they've been able to occupy themselves. They've been able to play with their toys. They've been able to eat their food and have a good relaxing day. And then when you come back, it isn't as much panic and distress. Your bird was able to occupy themselves and have fun, and it wasn't a day spent sitting in a corner of a cage being afraid and being confused and being distressed. A process that in-depth is very, very lengthy, and it does take a lot of time and a lot of dedication. But if you do dedicate the time to it and make this cue that specific situation where your bird is learning how to be calm for longer lengths of time, it absolutely does pay off in the end, where you're able to have a bird who will go into their cage when you ask them to and is able to remain relaxed for the duration of you being gone. So that is going to do it for this tutorial. I really hope that this behavior is able to relieve a lot of stress from you guys and your own birds. If you do end up using this behavior as a part of your protocols for treating separation anxiety within your bird, I do wish you the best of luck. It is a very challenging behavior problem to work with, and it is a lot of work. But when you get to the end, it is absolutely worth it when your bird is no longer stressed out and scared because of you having to leave the home. But that'll do it for me today, so thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye. Good boy. Yep, there you go. Come on, sir. Let's go. Buddy, you don't have to go back to bed, but buddy.